Welcome to today's episode of the podcast. I am Taylor Jackson, and you are here with myself and Greg Rollett. Today, Greg and I are going to be talking a little bit about how to create credibility for your business. Let's get to it. Creating credibility. I know video is obviously a huge way to create credibility in the wedding photography industry and just in general. What are your kind of tips on how to create credibility, just as kind of a broad subject?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that most great creative people don't like the idea of selling, right? So, we're really good at taking those photos. We're really good at creating that great album, but we hate like creating a pitch or like a proposal or going out and trying to sell ourselves. And what's weird is I'm a salesman. Like that's what I do 90% of the time. I'm trying to sell my products or services, but I hate selling. Like I'm scared. I have like a fear. I just whatever it is, like I don't have like 87 closing techniques or whatever. So I use media to overcome a lot of that. And I think that in my opinion, and this is my opinion alone, is the best way to sell is to show and tell. And just to help people, the best way to help people is to demonstrate how you can help them. So as a wedding photographer, you guys have a huge advantage because you just get to say, hey, here's my portfolio of work. Do you want stuff just like that? And that to me is the best way to sell. So so that's the first layer, is just proving that you're really good. So like for my stuff, when I teach marketing or I teach a funnel concept or whatever, I just get on the whiteboard and I demonstrate it. I say, hey, do you want to get more clients? Here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3, here's an example of step 1, example of step 2. So I'm showing and telling, right? So I think that's step 1. Step 2 is getting your clients to talk about you for you. That's obviously really good because you can say how awesome you are, but there's only so much believability there. So getting other people to say how awesome you are is really good. So getting clients on video to talk about, Taylor, positioned us in the right spot and he knew exactly the lighting and he knew what time of day we needed to do the engagement shoot and, just everything was done, perfectly. But so now getting them to say that's a second layer of credibility because now it's someone else saying how awesome you are. All right. So that's layer 2. So layer 1, show and tell. Layer 2 is testimonials. Layer 3 from credibility is getting another media source to say how awesome you are. So that would be, getting featured in the local newspaper about a beautiful shot that you got at a wedding. It would be, writing an article for The Knot. It would be, getting somebody who writes for The Knot to write an article on you. So that way you get to say you've been seen in The Knot. I'm using that. I don't know. There's probably cooler ones, but that's the only one I know off the top of my head. But so the third layer is then getting third-party media that is not yours to say how awesome you are. Video is cool for this because there's so many, people that do what are called like roundups. So like the top 10 destination wedding videos. I'm making this up, but like there's all these kinds of things on like BuzzFeed or on the Knot or in forums or whatever, and they post these like roundup posts that are like compilations of videos. And the cool thing is now your video is embedded on there. They usually link back to your YouTube channel. They link back to your website. Like they're just amazing. And now you get to say, hey, I was just featured in, the Toronto Times, website for being one of the top 10 wedding photographers. So that's another layer of credibility because it's not you saying how awesome you are or a client saying how awesome you are. The media says how awesome you are. And most people assume that if the media wrote about you, you must be good. It's just like this thing we have in our brain where we, even though like, in America, we have this fake news problem right now. But we still trust that if someone wrote an article about me in CNN today, people would be like, oh, wow, that's cool. Greg must be, there's something had to have happened to make someone at CNN want to write about me because most people aren't getting written about in CNN every day. Right? So those are kind of like the 3 layers. So the first is show and tell. The second is getting testimonials. And the third is getting third-party media to talk about you, feature you, interview you, whatever the case is. An easy way to build that third piece, because most of us don't have like PR reps like going out, for our wedding photography business, is podcasts. I think getting interviewed on podcasts is a huge opportunity for wedding photographers. And so what I would do is I would go, there's this great thing, it's called iTunes. And if you open up iTunes, you can click on this podcast tab and it'll open every podcast ever that's on iTunes. And what I would do is I would just search for if you're a local wedding photographer, I would just search for like Toronto. Just search, go into podcast and just search Toronto, and it's going to pull up every podcast that's about Toronto. Well, guess what? They've probably never interviewed a wedding photographer. And if you come on and you say, hey, I'd love to come on, be a guest on your show and talk about, 7 undisclosed locations that are great to get a sunset photo. If you're planning a fun Friday in Toronto, that was a terrible idea, but you get the point.
Yeah.
So if you go to, 10 Toronto-based podcasts, well, now you've been on 10 podcasts all in Toronto that'll all say how great you are, because they all do this thing. It's called an introduction, where they're like, hey, in this episode, I have Taylor Jackson. Taylor's one of Toronto's best wedding photographers, travels all over the world. He's got a travel show, and he is the number one guy when it comes to, well, guess what? That's now a testimonial from that podcast host, that just endorsed you. And now it's a podcast that lives on iTunes. People can find it. It's searchable. I think it's a great way to build credibility, and those guys need content, they need guests, and they're not getting approached by wedding photographers at all. So you will have a supreme advantage. So it's a free way to get press, publicity, talk about your business. And now it also gives you, like an MP3. So now you can send it to clients like, hey, I was actually just interviewed on, the Super Toronto Fun Times podcast. Here's a link to check it out. You can see I'm like the best at making up names of shows.
That name would work, I think.
But now you can send your client a link, and so now you're sending them to a third-party site, and there's so much more credibility in that than in just sending them to your about page on your website.
Yeah, and I guess kind of at least in our experience, specifically when I don't know if you know the story about that Lindsay photographed a Syrian tailor, Syrian refugee that had just moved to Canada. Wedding dress zipper broke, and Syrian tailor came in and saved the day. Spoke no English, second day in Canada.
Wow.
Huge news story. And she basically just typed it out on her Facebook page, hey, this is what happened, a few paragraphs, and then went to sleep, scheduled it for the next morning at 7 a.m. And she woke up at 10, and it already had hundreds of shares and hundreds of likes. And by that point, the media was already picking it up, which was crazy. And then it was basically a month of her doing back-to-back interviews, because once you basically make it local, then the provincial knows about you, then basically the world, across Canada and then into the world. And that's kind of how that all came together, that it was one small news coverage that could have been easily a podcast, and one person heard that, and then things just kind of spiraled from there, which was really, really, really incredible.
So now, real quick though, I want to piggyback on that. So getting that news story is incredible, but here's the thing. So that runs in the local paper or wherever it runs, and then people are going to go Google you, right? And to learn more about you, to find out about it. That's now why you need all of these videos, these other things that we've been talking about this whole episode, because now they're like, wow, that story was great. Oh my God, I just went to his website and he's got, 46 videos of all these awesome weddings that he's done. He's my guy, right? Because you get the news story and then they go to your website and it looks like it was built in 1997 and, you got your Ymail email address on there. You lose all the credibility. Right. And again, the person who's reading that newspaper or the person who's watching the local news might not be getting married tomorrow. But if you have that content, if you have a way for them to subscribe, if they can join your YouTube channel or your Facebook page or start watching your Instagram stories, and you're creating constant and consistent content, now when they're ready, you're the guy. So there's both sides of the equation. And I think it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, if that makes sense.
All right, that is all for today. I will see you again tomorrow for part 3 of this conversation, where we're going to be talking a little bit more about going full-time and overcoming that step in your life.